Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and after reviewing all of the 7 Saw films with Adam Haskell, it is now finally time for me to review the final film for now in the Saw franchise. That, of course, being a film that has been 7 years in the making, of course, being Jigsaw. And what Jigsaw is essentially about is basically it has been 10 years since John Kramer has died, and seemingly there is someone else still out there. There are all these murders happening, and a lot is connected to John Kramer. So basically, these two detectives have to investigate. Is it a copycat, possibly, what's really going on? Or is there a possibility that John Kramer is actually still alive? And that's really all I'm going to say. So, Jigsaw in general, going into this movie, of course, this was before I saw the Saw films, I was really looking forward to it. I actually was. I thought it looked really tongue-in-cheek. It looked a little bit more fun than some of the other Saw films, and it looked like a film that actually did have somewhat of a story, and it wasn't just, torture porn galore, which that really was my major issue with this series, that I just didn't really feel like they ever had that much of a story to begin with, except for the first one, really. The first one, a really great story, but the sequels really just kind of, diluted from that, and they didn't seem to care much about telling a story. They cared more about let's just see people get killed, and it looked like Jigsaw wasn't going to be that. And I have to say that after suffering through a lot of very hard to watch and just really horribly constructed films, Jigsaw is definitely a return to form for this franchise. Is it the best in the series? Absolutely not. I don't think anything is ever going to top the first Saw. I just don't ever see that happening. But it definitely is a step in the right direction for this franchise. It is something that I overall did have a good time with. It's not at all a perfect movie. There are still some problems with this film, but there was enough I liked about it, and we're going to talk about all of that starting off with the cast. And let me just say right now, a lot of these Saw films have had some really, really horrendous acting and a lot of characters that just really weren't all that great. This is one of the first Saw films in general that almost all across the board I thought had really solid acting. Not amazing acting, but it was suitable. For a Saw film, it was really suitable, and I thought most of these actors did a really good job. Matt Passmore, he plays our lead here, Logan, and he actually does a really good job. He is sort of like this forensics doctor who he is trying to gather all the information he can about, the Jigsaw killer and who it actually might be. I thought he honestly did a really good job in this film. He carried it very well, and I really did like his character here. However, surprisingly, the standout in this film actually wasn't one of the 4 main characters. It was actually one of the, it was actually one of the kidnappers, which those characters are never my favorite, but I actually really did like one of them. That being Laura Vandervoort, who, to my knowledge, is one of the only well-known actors in these Saw films. All the other ones I've seen, there hasn't been a lot of actors that I recognize. This is one of the first ones where I spotted this actress right away. I've really liked what I've seen of her, and she gives a really good performance here as Anna. Anna is someone who, in a lot of these films, there have been a lot of characters just make really dumb decisions and just start fighting. Anna is sort of the rational one. She's trying to figure out, how they can get out of this barn, how they can run all of these traps, and I thought she definitely did a really good job. She also had a really good backstory as well. I actually really did like her backstory in the film. I thought for the most part, she definitely did do a really good job here. I was very impressed by her character overall, and she is definitely one of my favorite characters in this entire franchise so far. And then everyone else as well, I thought was actually really good here. Callum Rennie plays our head detective, Detective Halloran, and he did a really good job. He's determined to figure out what's going on here. He wants to prove everyone there's no way that Jigsaw could possibly still be alive. He just wants to really just crack this case and end it, as well as his partner, Detective Keith Hunt. I thought those two worked really well together. I really liked Eleanor. I like the character of Eleanor, played by Hannah Emily Anderson. She is Logan's partner in all this. They work together, but she's a lot more fucked up than you'd think she'd be without saying too much. She really is a very messed up character. There's a lot of stuff going on with her, and I thought she definitely did a really good job. And I thought the two actually had really good chemistry. I actually liked their chemistry throughout the film, and I thought they worked really well together. here. And like I said, the other victims in the film really weren't too bad. I really like Paul Braunstein as Ryan. Yes, he is just as self-aware as he is in the trailer. He actually did have some good comedic moments here, and I thought he did really good. Mandela Van Peebles I actually liked as Mitch. Really, there aren't that many bad performances here. I will say, Brittany Allen as Carly, I really wasn't the hugest fan of her. She did play one of the people who are kidnapped, and I didn't really like her all that much. Josiah Black as Edgar Munson, I didn't really like him that much either, but this is definitely one of the more solid casts I've seen for a Saw film, and like I said, I think that really does elevate this film overall for me. So now let's get to the directing and the writing, because holy shit, I mean, I really want to give credit to the Spierig brothers here, because their directing to this film is a huge improvement of the other sequels. Even the good ones like Saw 6, I still didn't think had the greatest directing. This film fixes that. It is very focused on just these two stories. It's not feeding you all this information and throwing all these flashbacks. It actually is very well paced, and I was definitely very impressed by that. I like the way this film was paced. It actually, felt like they had a story to tell here, and I thought that tone worked very well. And the screenplay in general, I actually did like to this film. I thought, like I said, it wasn't just a bunch of dumb characters. I was surprised by how smart Laura Vandervoort's character really was. I thought that was definitely very well done, and I very much did enjoy that here. And I thought the writing in general was really well done. But now we're going to get into some of my more negative stuff with this film, because like I said, this isn't a perfect movie by any means. Really, my biggest thing with this film is, once again, the problem I've had with the other films, and that the story they're telling here, yes, it is a little bit more interesting. There's a little bit more to it than some of the other films have been. But at the end of the day, it's not the most interesting story in the world. There are quite a few things that definitely don't hold up in this film, and it was hard to tell when exactly this film was really taking place. Is it taking place after the events of the last few films, or is it trying to be its own thing? Which, there are parts of this film where it's trying to be its own thing, but that part is just a bit confusing for me. In general, the police stuff is a bit confusing, and the characters, as much as I did like the acting here, they're still not the most interesting. They're still not one-dimensional, but they're just not that multi-layered. They're not really characters that you necessarily like, oh, I'm really rooting for them. But there are some really well-done characters. They gave more for the character development. They gave more to these characters in the sense where they tried to make them a little bit more interesting. They tried to make them a little bit more memorable, and I think they did succeed at that. I do think we had some characters here that were a little bit more interesting than we've seen in some of the other films. I also really like the way this film painted Jigsaw, because in this film, Jigsaw is no longer looked at as just a criminal. He's now looked at as sort of a cult-like figure. I mean, there are now websites dedicated to, worshiping Jigsaw and all this kind of stuff, and I thought that was honestly really interesting. It kind of reminded me of Cult of Chucky a little bit, in the way where, there's like this one group that's dedicated to Jigsaw and things like that, but they barely scratch the surface of it, honestly. They don't really show it a lot. It's mainly just for one character, but for me it was enough. I still liked hearing some of it because it was different. It was something we hadn't seen before, and I did think that was very well done. And that was something I did enjoy. The hostages part of the story, I didn't find boring, actually. I didn't find boring, and it's not just, let's just torture these people. Yes, there are torture scenes in this film, but it's not like every 5 seconds someone is getting tortured. And again, that is a huge improvement over the other films. The other films would just go right for the torture and not concentrate on the story, and this one actually does a good job of doing that. And I did enjoy the way that was done overall, and I thought the way they told the story was definitely very well done. It's slow paced, and that's something that I definitely did enjoy. I really did enjoy the pacing in regards to how they did tell this story. The cinematography here is, again, huge improvement from the other films, because the way this film is shot, It actually looks like a movie. It doesn't just look like, some network television show. It looks like a movie. It really does. And it's easily the best cinematography I've seen in any of these films. Again, as good as the first one was, technology has very much advanced since then, and it's very evident with this film. I thought the cinematography was really good here. The score. I always talk about the score in these films. I know I'm sounding redundant, but I actually don't have to, because for the first time, to my knowledge, they actually kind of update the score a little bit. It's a little bit altered. Yes, they do have the classic da 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 da, but especially the way the film starts, they actually do a pretty good job of updating it and giving us a slightly different alteration than we're used to. And I honestly really enjoyed it. I thought it kept the film fresh and exciting, and that was something I definitely enjoyed. It ran the risk of the franchise getting too repetitive, and they did a really good job with that. And then the editing. I thought the film was actually very well paced. I wasn't necessarily bored that much. I thought the third act definitely did. The pacing in the third act, in my opinion, definitely did hurt the film a little bit. And we're going to talk about the third act right now, because the third act essentially kind of ruined this movie for me. I was really into the first two acts of this movie. Unfortunately, though, all the positives that I do have with this film are pretty much talking about the first two acts of this film, which I thought were honestly very well handled. I thought that they were well presented, and I thought they did a good job of, like I said, focusing on the story. The third act is when things really went off the rails for me. The third act is not terrible necessarily. There's just a lot of things that I think worked but also didn't work, because while this film definitely did a suitable job at delivering a somewhat interesting story and focusing on the story and not as much on the traps, it doesn't fully deliver in the way I wanted to, and we're going to get into all of that right now. Which, because of the fact that I'm no longer doing collab reviews, I now have the ability to actually delve into spoilers, which I'm going to do right now. So we're just going to jump right into it. So we get to, of course, the third act of this film, and I didn't know really what was going to happen, who the actual killer was going to be. There were definitely a lot of options, but we get to, of course, the two remaining the two remaining sort of hostages in the film. And I knew Anna was going to be one of the last ones, because she was the one that had the most development. I knew for a while that she probably was going to be the one to survive, but it turns out we see this masked figure, and it's Jigsaw. Yeah, and when I mean Jigsaw, I mean Tobin Bell is very much alive, and I almost screamed in the theater, because I was like, what the fuck? You can't tell me that this guy is actually alive. He very clearly died in the third movie. He was dying of cancer. There's no way that he could possibly be alive, so I got really pissed at that revelation. And then the whole thing where he's like, oh, it was just some other guy, they misdiagnosed me. It just made no sense, because if that's actually true, how can you explain what goes down in the third film? What was that? Was that just like a double? What was really going on there? It doesn't really make a ton of sense, because it did seem like Jigsaw was very clearly dying, and it seemed like, Kramer had no chance of survival. So that's something that I really didn't understand. And I do have to say, as much as I enjoyed Anna in the first two acts, the reveal with her felt very out of character. Because we find out, we thought in the first two acts that basically she had this child and that her husband is the one who suffocated the child. But it turns out Anna is actually the one who suffocated the child. And for me, it just didn't really work. I thought it was just, they did it so Anna had something to confess. And it just didn't really come together for me in the way I think they wanted it to. Unfortunately, they tried, but for me, it just really didn't work, unfortunately. And it sucks, because I do think there are some good ideas there, but it just really didn't work, unfortunately. And then, of course, when we get to the big reveal at the very end of the film, that not only, and I was surprised that Anna wasn't the one that actually lived, and I did like the reveal that she was Kramer's neighbor. I thought that was actually kind of cool. But I like that she wasn't the one that lived, because it was actually pretty unpredictable. I thought for sure that she was going to be the one to live, but no, it's actually Ryan that ends up living, and we don't really see what goes down after that. And we find out at the end of the film, basically what ends up happening is Logan ends up holding Detective Halloran hostage, and it turns out that everything we saw in the film took place 10 years ago. Yes, you heard me right. Everything in the barn with the hostages, that was 10 years ago. I'm not even joking. And it took me a while to actually fully process this revelation. At first, I didn't realize that everything went down 10 years ago. I thought, like, somehow Kramer was still alive, but I'm glad that they didn't go in that direction, because that just would have been a slap in the face to everyone. We already had a ridiculous twist in the final chapter, and I didn't think they could possibly get worse. And let me just say, there are some good ideas in this twist. I like the idea that this went down 10 years ago. I like the idea that Logan was actually a part of this, and that Logan was actually the first person to get killed, and Jigsaw actually saved him. I don't like the fact that this was the first killing that Jigsaw ever did, because it just feels way too complex. It feels like something a killer does, when they're on, when they're at their highest moment possible, and when they are on their, their high streak, and everything's just going great for them, and they've committed all these kills. It doesn't seem like the first one you do. The first one you do seems like something simple, like what happened with Lawrence and Adam. That is exactly the kind of one you do first. But here, it just felt way too complex, and the technology really does not fit it's not up to par with technology of 10 years ago. It really feels like something that would be technology today, and that just really didn't work for me. Again, it was a cool idea, but it just really didn't work. And then the very end of the film, where it turns out that Logan was actually Kramer's first apprentice, which it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if that's true, how do you explain him appointing Amanda? How do you explain him appointing how do you explain him appointing Dr. Gordon? And more importantly, how has Hoffman been able to get away with all this stuff? How is Logan not come in competition with him? It doesn't make any sense to me narratively, and it acts like those characters don't exist, which I understand this series is trying to, start sort of like a reboot sort of thing. Yes, it's referencing elements from the previous films, but it is one of the only films in the series to not show events in previous films, and I did like the way this did that, but they also have to take in consideration that those films did exist. This is not a reboot in the sense where, the other films didn't happen. There was a Hoffman, there was a Dr. Gordon, so how do you explain to me that those two, and Amanda, that those three were out and about being, Jigsaw's apprentices, while Logan was still alive? It just doesn't make any sense to me. It feels really just like they didn't know who to make the killer, so they just made Logan sort of the killer, which I kind of predicted he was going to be, so it definitely wasn't that shocking to me at all. And then the way the movie ended, I thought was honestly kind of dumb. It just really set the film up like, we're just going to continue from here, and I just really think it was a lame way to end things. Personally, the one who I wanted to be the killer was Eleanor. I wanted Eleanor to be the killer, which I thought, I understand why they didn't do that. It would have been way too obvious because, she was a worshiper of Jigsaw's, but I really want to dive deeper into that cult. What's going on with that cult? How long has that cult been around? Why did they have all of... how did they get all of Kramer's, sort of props that he had? I thought that was actually really interesting the way it was done. Also, the reveal that Logan basically sort of redid this entire sort of trap, and that he replicated it from 10 years ago, still doesn't make any sense. I don't know how he was able to do that. It just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. And like I said, the twist in this film really didn't help matters at all. This was a very solid film for me, but the twist honestly kind of ruined it. It makes me interested in seeing where they're going to take this series. It's definitely not the worst twist the series has done by far, but it just seemed like a very easy way out, and there were a lot of things that they explained very quickly that I feel like they should have taken more time to explain, and they really didn't here. Also, the other thing I'm very confused about is, since we know that Kramer is, I'm assuming he's dead, I mean, the film didn't say that he was still alive, what was the whole debacle with the decoy then? What was the whole thing with him saying, they misdiagnosed me? What was that really about? It didn't make any sense to me how he could possibly have been misdiagnosed, because to my knowledge, I mean, he only found out about this cancer, like, yeah, he had it for a while, but I didn't think that he had cancer prior to this. I mean, I don't really know, maybe I'm just looking into it too much, but it's just, again, it's things that the movie should have taken the time to explain, and they just really didn't. So overall, guys, Jigsaw is definitely a huge improvement among the other sequels. No, it is not one of the best Saw films. It definitely is a film that I was very much entertained by, but like I said, the twist at the end really did kind of spoil a lot of the goodness of the film for me. But I'm still going to take into consideration how much I enjoyed those first two acts, because I definitely did enjoy it. I thought it was very solid. I thought we had some good traps here and there. I thought there were actually some good characters in this movie. So yes, I did overall enjoy it. I just thought the twist at the end, again, it just did away a lot of the suspense, and there's a lot of things here that I'm just honestly kind of confused by. But when it really does come down to it, guys, I did overall enjoy Jigsaw, and I am going to give Jigsaw the same grade I gave Saw 6, actually, which is a B minus. But overall, guys, in my review of Jigsaw, let me know what you guys thought of this movie overall. Left your thoughts. And like I said, I did overall enjoy this film. If you haven't liked a Saw film up to this point, you're definitely not going to like this one. It's really not all that different, but it is more focused on the story. It does give you a bit more interest with the characters, and it does make me just a little bit more hopeful for the Saw series moving forward. But that's in my review. Hope you enjoyed. See you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.